Well, hello everyone. I'm here tonight with Marah Cover and Bobby Picker. Marah's from Indiana, Bobby's from Missouri. They're both super busy choreographers, and I'm excited to talk to them. And we're going to be focusing on what musicians need to know about choreography. There's a lot of people in show choir land who, have gone to school for music or have lots of training in singing or piano or education, and they don't necessarily get much instruction about dance, and then they get thrown into show choir, and it's a lot to take in all at once. So I guess let's just start there, assuming that you're explaining choreography to somebody who has never done it before, just a total musician. Like, what are sort of the basic terms that they need to know, like sort of basic skills? I mean, is there sort of an equivalent to, like, in music, you have like your scales and your key signatures and like just sort of basic things that everything's built on? Like, I assume there's similar things in the dance world. So like, what are some of the basics?
I always talk to people who don't get this world very much, and I tell them it's almost the equivalent of you thinking of them as a visual arranger who also teaches the arrangement
Okay,
visually.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly choreographers were the vision of the show. So, I definitely think that if I were explaining to someone new, I'd be like, you need to tell me what you want, what your vision is, and like, let me make it come alive and like help your students make it come alive. I think that's definitely a way I would explain it to someone new. But I like the visual arranger. I'm gonna have to steal that.
So
It
when
just
you're
lines up perfectly because an arranger is coming up with all of the layers, the parts. We're coming up with layers for
yeah,
those parts, and it just almost they both literally run like hand in hand.
so most of the time, unless you're working with a totally new group, there's some kids that have had, they've danced before.
Yeah.
But are there certain like technique things that you teach them or that you expect them to know?
I think so. What I do in the summer is I'll go around to my local schools and I'll do technique classes with them. So it is important to teach them like a basis understanding because there are a lot of choreographers that will come in and use terminology that your kids may not be aware of. And if they're a good teacher, if they're a good choreographer, they'll be like, okay, now we're gonna stand like in passe, and they'll be like, okay, this is what passe means, and like show them. Or like plie means to bend your knees. So like as we teach or we go on, like I will use those terms and then kind of like go back and be like, this is what that means. But there is a set of terminology. I just think in dance in general that show choir students who may not have that background like come adapt to because they've been around it or it's in the teaching style. But there's definitely like point your toes, like basic stuff like teaching, how to dance lower in your legs and your plie, pointing your toes, your body carriage, and how you isolate the top of your body from the lower half of your body. So I definitely think there's like, not that they're expected to know, but also I think that as the process of learning goes on, they will pick up on it. So whenever I go to a group for the first time, they're always like, they're adapting to what I'm doing. And then so I'm here, and then at the end of the season when I'm teaching their closer, it's like they've come so far and like it's a little bit quicker process. So I think it like comes as a learning process mostly for students, but as a director I do think it's important for them to be aware and like know, like, so they can translate that terminology when we're not there.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I would agree pretty much with everything that was just said. You just have to take it group by group as well with like adapting to if that's going to be like super foreign to them, obviously working that in a little bit, like not sneaky, but just working it in slower to them so that they're not just like, oh my God, what are you talking about? But more so maybe on the back end, even sometimes where they're already doing the stuff you're talking about because they've seen it and you're doing it with them. And then you're like, now do you know what that is in terms of dance, what you just did?
Mhm.
because yeah, it's just a balance of it. But I agree with all of that.
So what I'm hearing is it's like easier to sort of teach the terminology as you go rather than trying to like front load it before you start. Is that
I
right?
think so. I think as the learning process, you know, when you are learning choreography, like your not only does your body have to be engaged, your brain is engaged. And if it, I like to like start my rehearsals with like getting in that spot of like where we can be fully engaged. And so then it's just easier to like grasp onto those concepts because not only are you thinking it, you're moving it. And so I think like whenever I do technique classes, like I usually like go over a couple like just basic things with them, and then I will teach them like a combination that they'll do, for that night with that specific like specific terminology or specific movement that I was going over, so that they kind of have like a before. And I think that's smart for directors, especially if they have a young group, having just the choreographer come in and do like a fun little like fall number or something before they learn their show, so that it's a little bit easier transition. So I think it's okay to expose your kids before you learn your show.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you have the time, it's definitely worth like setting something like that up to start your year. But that's like the crunch time that like a choreographer faces is it's near impossible to hold a dance class within the time frame that you're teaching. So we're kind of like forced to disguise the dance class within the 4 hours or whatever we have to actually pump out all the choreo for that specific number. So you try to at least, pass a couple handouts to them so that they're taking away something beyond show choir, because show choir is a tool, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you actually have handouts that go with it. That's cool.
Well, no, I'm just saying like hand out the actual information as we go
Yeah,
versus
okay.
because we can't hardly like the battle you face is that most groups are going to have so many different levels, whereas then if you go to a dance class, it's set up for
Right.
what show choir is with the prep and top group. Well, we have jazz 1, jazz 2, advanced jazz, moderate jazz, like all this stuff, so you can base a whole class around it. When we're going, we're just kind of on the fly with like, oh, there's 12 people who are on the dance team in the front row in this group, I can use a lot more terminology. But then you have other groups where it's like, oh, they came out of the woods and they are just still putting on the right sneakers. So
Yeah, or like beginners, and that's okay if your group is beginners, because
mhm.
everyone's got to start somewhere. And so if you're wanting to start a new group and you're like, I don't have any strong dancers, it's not that big of a deal, because I see so many of my own students just progress within the years that I've had them. I'm getting to the point where I have seniors that I've had as freshmen, and who they were as freshmen are just insanely different as they are as seniors. So if you're growing a program, or you're like, oh, they're not the best dancers, like, it's okay. Like you can't just be good. You have to build something, and it's getting the right people in your room and exposing your students to just as much style difference as they can. Like, don't just do pop songs, do like a jazz song, do Broadway, like expose them to different styles and build. And if you're like, oh, this is my first or second year of the program, hardly any programs that I know that start out come out like winning grand championships, and that is okay. Like, it takes about like 4 or 5 years, I think, to build a program. And so like, it's just, you have to trust the process. It's not going to just be like, I started here and they're going to be amazing this year. Like, they're going to be really great and they're going to improve, but everybody else is really great and really improving too. So yeah, I think that you just have to trust your process and expose your students to as much as you can. Don't just do one genre, do a bunch of different stuff. And that goes, I mean, with the vocal side too. You want to sing different ways and all that. So
And take those first years like before you're competitive to do those things too. It's like I would focus way more if you're a new director on getting all the basics and not even worrying about competing even, but I would take those kids to find a really good competition somewhere nearby that you can all plan a day and go like see kind of what's going on. and then have a conversation about it after. But I would take those first years, like the mistake I always see is people are taking it out and, like she just said, wanting to be super competitive second one. And so you're getting seen in a bad light because you're not going to be. So it's much better off to kind of stay in the classroom a little bit longer. And then once you're feeling comfortable and you're building that program, then go out there onto the stage and like showcase, like, look, we're in progress. Like we have some of the basics and we're ready to keep this thing moving. But don't just like pony to the clump day one.
Yeah, if you're feeling unsure, like there are things that directors need to know, like the really good groups do the details really well, and that's like getting on and off stage, that's knowing their blocking, when like just simple things is like when you're supposed to have your feet together, have your feet together, like those like details and presence and how they all those details that directors are in charge of. Like if a director is not comfortable doing like the blocking, then how are the students going to be comfortable doing it? So making sure that, you know, if the blocking's not right, what's the point of doing the choreo, And so like having the details all set together and then building upon that. Because if you can't stand with your feet together, then like what makes you think you can like get crazy and do dance, like figuring like setting like a beginner, like let's make this really good, and then next year let's make it a little bit harder and then a little bit harder, so it's not just like here's the hardest choreo that this choreographer can do, good luck. Like
Well, and a lot of that stuff doesn't require any training. I mean, knowing where to stand, like that's not a dancing thing. That's just life,
exactly.
Everyone knows how to stand, and I think maybe some of the moves can be broken down to that point where it's like, well, it's like you may not be a great dancer, but you still know like how to hold your arm straight, or know how to put your hand in a fist or whatever it happens to be. So I guess thinking about that, like is there a particular style of dance that is the closest to what show choir choreography typically is, or is show choir different enough to be its own style of dance?
Like
Obviously it changes from song to song, but
I would say the average is probably what closest to like a form of like street jazz or like some sense of that. Jazz being like the main thing is what I would say if you're trying to like compare it to show like what.
no, if I'm a director and I'm trying to learn and I'm just Googling styles of dance, like what are the styles that are most important to know? Like what's going to be most applicable to show choir land?
Jazz.
Okay.
If we were like talking about like the basis of dance, I would say ballet, but for show choir, I would say definitely jazz. I do think like, yeah. I mean, you have groups that tap and you have groups that do like Broadway, but
well, if you're going to do a song in a different style, of course, hopefully your choreographer is giving you stuff in that style. But I think, I can definitely see like from group to group, there's a lot of similar kinds of movements that people do. And I guess I'm just wondering, is that like a show choirism, like the shampoo and stuff, or is that coming from something?
I think definitely jazz.
It all stems from jazz, and I dance is so interconnected that like all the styles run in together. But I think for show choir, like with all like the pop stuff or like the hip hop or even like something more lyrical, like there's all a basis there. And I would definitely say new choir director, like what should I have my kids do is definitely jazz for sure. And it's easier to grasp onto because it's a little more fluid in what it needs to be. It's not like ballet that's like there's a million things you have to understand about that. So yeah.
All right, so here's a juicy one. You talked about building a program. So let's say I'm a new director and I have to hire somebody to be my choreographer, but I don't have a dance background. So what am I looking for? I mean, obviously I would say you want to look at examples of their choreography, but when I'm doing that, like what should I be looking for to decide if it's a good fit for my school or not?
I think one of my biggest things with being a show choir choreographer, because I do come from a dance background, I've worked in a dance studio, I've worked with dancers who have been in dance, but going to show choir, you have to understand that the majority of your students have never set foot into a dance class. A lot of these kids will dance for the first time with you. And I really think the best choreographers are the best teachers. Translating body to body or speaking out loud, like using metaphors, like you should feel like you're actually pushing something physically up, like instead of being like, okay, we're going to put our arm here on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There you go. Like there's such a difference of the rooms I've been in with really, really talented teachers and how students respond to that. And so I think, yes, you want to look at their work and their product, but asking around and asking directors like, hey, like, what's their teaching process? What's their teaching style? Because if you're not super intricate on what you're teaching these new groups, then it's not going to get into their body. Whereas like, you work with, like, we both have groups that we've worked for 5 or 6 years, and it's more a little lax because those are the only style of dance they've ever had is me. And so they know exactly what I'm talking about. They know exactly what I want. So like building that program, you really want to find, I think a good teacher is important. Yes, you have to be a great dancer, of course, but being like, you don't have to be studio trained or like all of that. Like as long as you're like really invested in being an educator of dance, I think that's my opinion. So
I think definitely there'll be trial and error, like kind of regardless, and finding what worked, like you specifically said, finding what works for your kids. And I would say my advice for if you're new is to get on YouTube or go to a couple competitions and just kind of watch. And if you gravitate towards something that you see, who did that? Call them. Maybe they can't do it. And also don't expect what you saw, if it's some of those top groups, to look like what it's going to look like on your group, or even expect that choreographer could come in and teach what you just saw. I mean, they may come in and you may give them a whole different song and they're doing something you didn't think, like you were expecting what was on the video, and they're like, oh, it's a jazz number, we're going to do jazz. And you're like, wait, I thought we were going to do like hip hop. So I just think trial and error and figuring out, again, who is that teacher for your kids too, like who's not going to get super frustrated because maybe there's 7 kids in your group, and like you might call somebody who does groups of 50 all the time and you've only got a $500 budget. And so sometimes even you have to start with, like, maybe you have a really talented kid and that's the starting point or something to like just start working on some dance fundamental stuff. But it's definitely advantageous for a director to like take a look in on choreo, like literally what you're doing right here with setting this up. It's the more the better choices you can make for your kids and your program to be in good hands.
And I would just to add to that, don't be afraid to ask, because even if you like this choreographer and you're like, hey, like, can you come in and whatever, and they're like, actually, like, I'm too busy, ask them for a recommendation. I have lots of people that have either like been my assistants or who are assisting other people who are young, who are like have that time to invest in a group. I mean, that's how I got started. I got started with one group, and a lot of my time and energy went to building that program. I don't necessarily think that would be in my time today, but there are really talented, like, younger people out there that want that start, that want that like in. And so like, and you may not know, but to ask, like, if I can't do a job, then I will recommend somebody that I trust and that I know will go and like do a really good job. And so that's how, new people get started. I think that's really important too, is that show choir is such a interconnected community, especially amongst choreographers. Like, we all kind of know each other. We may not all be like really great friends, but we all are aware of what we're doing and like who's working with us. And I think like, oh, hey, like, I know you have this assistant, like, do you think they would want to like come in and work with this group? Like, ask, because I just feel like we're always trying to elevate others too, and like elevate the world of show choir. So don't be afraid to ask us. We may have someone else for you.
And if you are a director, and it might be more comfortable for you to call a director friend or somebody who already kind of has a program up and running, and there's lots of ways to connect with people like on social media that is already out there, like show choir directors and all of that. Sometimes it can be kind of cool and a good experience for you to go hop in one of their rehearsals when they do have that choreographer in town and see what's going on and see like that process, so you can kind of be aware of, you know, maybe if they're on a larger scale or whatever, that's fine, but you can kind of be looking at that in a more comfortable setting, like with another director's program, versus just kind of a cold call to a choreographer and you're not comfortable maybe with discussing stuff because you don't know what you're doing. So maybe it's more comfortable you say, because there's other directors who are also not comfortable in the choreography land, but that's a good way for like you to just get an experience of like what a choreographer and show choir is like and how that goes with teaching.
Well, and a lot of that's personality too, just like the way people teach. Like some people are very like boom, 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 and they've got it all planned out, you know, and some people are more more experimental, I guess, you know, they're trying different things, they're changing things a lot, you know, and some people just come and do it once, boom, they're done. So I mean, that I think plays a role too, just with how you like to teach a show. And like, well, here's one, like, do you think it's better for the kids to know the music before you come in, or is it better after? Does it matter? I know you do it all different ways. Does it matter if it's all in 1 week or spread out over the year? Like, there's a bunch of different ways that you schedule your choreography. Like, what have you found to be the best?
Before.
In a perfect world, before, but you know how, I mean, Garrett, you arrange for a lot of my groups, like it's hard, and like sometimes, you know, stuff happens or our schedules don't line up. Like it's not impossible to teach without the arrangement, but for the benefit of the kids, I do think, especially a newer group, I would think that's really important. So like you're like, hey, we're working on the chorus, the second chorus. They're like, well, we don't even know this song.
Right.
So, yeah. In a perfect world.
Yeah.
What about the cramming it all into 1 week versus spreading it out? What have you seen? Like, how does, like, what are the pros and cons?
Uh,
Are there any
I
are there
mean,
any pros?
I've done everything. I've done a week, I've done half shows, and I've done like, oh, I'm gonna come teach a number once a month. I think my favorite is the in between, is doing half the show for 4 days and then, or 3 days or whatever, and then the other half for 3 days, just so you can kind of break it up, but also like you're not completely taking yourself out of the show, so you're not like, what did we do, you know.
Mhm.
Doing a full show in a week can be really challenging. Your group has to be, I think, pretty skilled to do it, and it's possible. There's lots of choreographers that do that, but make sure that it has to be the right fit for your group, honestly, and for your choreographer. So
Yeah, I was gonna say I have no shame in saying that I can do your show in a week, but it'll be better in halves because there's just a creative frying. I mean, even you as an arranger, you know, it's like there comes a point where you just have to like and step away for a minute to get your creativity back. Otherwise, you're gonna be like, wait a minute, I just literally did I just do the same things? Oh,
yes, you're like in this space and you're like, I'm doing
yeah.
the same moves and I know I am, and I need to like, yeah. I
Okay,
mean,
so I have to know, like, I'm walking around, I'll have like songs stuck in my head or like ideas of like vocal things. Are you just walking around in your head like all the time, like with dance moves? Like, how do you
Literally.
like how do you, but this is the serious question, like how do you actually come up with it? Like, do you have to actually, can you just be thinking and imagine it, or do you have to physically be moving your body?
It's no lie, but that's literally I mean, that's the starting point for me, is like people will make fun of me or like, you know, who are like around me or whatever, but I will sit there on a couch and just like have my eyes closed even, but I literally play the motion picture of a show choir doing it in my head, but then I have to translate that in small portions of like, once I like it, I'm like, okay. And then I'll start to figure out a way to notate that so that I know what that means, or record it on a video like of that. But yes, I literally see it on stage in my head as it's like coming to me while I listen to a song or whatever.
Yeah. I choreograph with a partner, and I will be like, I'm so notorious for this. I'm like playing the song, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, I know exactly what needs to happen here, and I'll explain it, and he'll be like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but sure. Like you like see it in your head, and you're like, I know what it's gonna be. Okay, let's like put movement to it. But I think for me personally, to stay fresh, I say like probably once a week I will go in like my den, and I will just improv like to different music, and just kind of mess around to make sure that like my movement stays fresh. And so I probably am one of those people that's like walking around doing weird dance moves all the time, but it's
Because
definitely
you're inventing new moves too. You're not just
yeah.
recycling like techniques.
And just like finding different ways for your body to move. Like you might like improving means to just kind of like play a song and just go with it, like, and it's not something I do in front of other people. Like it's definitely just for me. But sometimes I'll be like, oh, I like the way like I felt when I moved that way, or oh, this move is new, or how do I do this move but in lower. Like that's how I kind of stay fresh. Now by December, I'm like over it and tired, and I'm like, I can't move anymore. But I like to stay fresh that way. So then when I am like envisioning stuff, I'm like, oh, this would be cool here. Like I really want to do this particular like count of 8. So how do I incorporate that? And then it just kind of comes together from there.
Do you come up with the pictures at the same time? Is it like, I want this line here, or do you just have the moves and then you have to figure out where to put everything?
I like to know where they're gonna stand before. But I know
I'm all over the place, to be honest with you, because I'll hear a song, or even like maybe I probably tend to do it more so on the openers, where I like the pictures before, because I just know like that opening I want to be probably something that's more like visually really pleasing versus like a number 2 or a 4 or whatever. I think it just, for me, it just depends on like where the inspiration starts. Like, if we're just talking like a something that closes, or like a quick song like that, I'll figure it out pictures like later. But if it's something a little bit more theatrical, or that dramatic feel of like some of the opening stuff or whatever, I really kind of want to know how I'm going to progress like through the pictures with that, and it helps me to come up with some of the layers and stuff that I'll do. But again, other times I'll just hear the song and I'll be like, ooh, I want to dance. Like this song makes me want to dance.
Yeah. So let's talk about like pictures and blocking and staging, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure what the right term is. Like, what are sort of the basics of like what makes a good picture?
Doors and windows. I think blocking, I really enjoy like different intricate blocking, negative space.
Like, are there certain shapes that are better than others generally, or does it depend on how many kids there are?
I mean, I for my smaller groups, especially if I have like less like tenor bass parts, I will block them almost like more strategically together so they don't get drawn out by the soprano alto. With a bigger group, I think there's way more like just kind of freedom. But my smaller groups, if there's only 2 tenors, I'm gonna try not to put one here and one here. I want them to sound good and all that. So I think it depends on your size of your group, but definitely like make like the choreography is meant to be danced in this position that your choreographer gave you. And so like if you're not doing regular blocking checks for each song, or your students don't know where they stand, that's number one. We need to figure that out. And then the choreography might clean up a little bit. But if someone's in the wrong spot doing the choreo, like it may look dirtier than what it's supposed to look like. So
Yeah, I always over exaggerate it to kids when they like, because there's just a lot of students don't think that's like super important because they just don't wrap their head around it yet. But I'm always like, y'all, this is literally 80 to 90% of the cleanliness that you're going to have is just simply being in the right spots, because that's your color pops, that's your layers pops, that's your levels. That's literally everything about that is going to if we're all starting at a 0 and all we can do is just move through transitions into our blocking spots, okay, well, there's at least cleanliness in the pictures of like all of that. But yeah, you can't be letting people drive cars through your partner blocking.
Or like making sure that when you do block, your transitions make sense. So if I have a kid on stage left, I'm not going to block them in their next spot across the stage. I don't like my students to move like more than 2 rows or crossing center if I can help it. Now, sometimes that's going to happen. It is what it is. But if you have bumper cars on stage and everyone looks like they're out of like I call it the scramble light, like trying to get through, that is also not pleasing to a judge's eye. They're going to be like, why is everyone frantically running to their spot? Like, it should ease into what you're doing. It should feel like the choreography. It can't just be like, well, this person's here, so now I want them to go to the back corner and they're going to walk up 4 risers. Like, that's one, not good for them because, but so when you are doing blocking, make sure that they're staying close or it's manageable to move.
How much of that is the director's responsibility, or do you know the kids well enough to know and to like think through all of that?
Oh, so sorry. I definitely think that if you like, I put names in, like I only have some directors that will, and so yeah, it's pretty much our responsibility, but any changes are made need to be like strategic changes. I don't know how you do it, Bobby, if you do names or if you have directors that do it.
If I don't know or I don't feel like I know the kid, like if it's a bunch of new kids or something like that, I might have them for one chart just like put what they think, but in all honesty, a lot of times it is not right, but it's just easier for me once they're like in that spot and I just have them dance something, then I'll just be like, can I see that real quick, and be like, but I'll do it like after one section, for instance, is taught, and it's like a unison thing where I'm like, I'm gonna have a base for like all these kids movement, and maybe I miss a couple like going that quickly, but by the end it's like I've adjusted it so that we get them all in the right spot before we've learned like 18 different layers, and then you're like, would that be a problem for you to switch to that? And they're like, wait, what? I don't even know this choreography.
Yeah, no, I get that.
So that's what I do. I don't know.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit already, just like there's certain things on the score sheet judges are looking for, like blocking is a big one. Like, can you tell where everyone, like that everyone is where they're supposed to be? Transitions, I think, is another sort of obvious one. But some of those visual categories, like even for me, they're a little bit hard to tell, like how to satisfy them, if that makes sense. Like it feels easier on the vocal side, obviously, because I'm a musician, but it's like, okay, diction, like I know how to fix that, or intonation, that sort of thing. Like what are sort of the most, like if we're shifting to talking about cleaning choreography, like what's like the priorities of like, what do we fix? Like, and how do we sort of teach to this sheet and sort of like make sure that you're going to like get the points that you want to get, if that makes sense?
I think it's different for every choreographer. I think it's different. I've never really choreographed to a sheet. I encourage my students to like, yes, cleanliness is important, especially if you're like starting out, and making sure that your lines match, and like if your arm's in a high V, there's not someone doing this, they're all doing that. I definitely think using mirrors is really important. But then you get to some sheets that have style on there. So if you're so clean and everyone's just doing all this strut movement, well, what do you mark on style? There is none, So I'm interested, Bobby, to hear your opinion on this.
I mean, I agree with Garrett in saying like, I think it is a little bit like, it's hard. I don't know. I find it's difficult sometimes, even for me, when I'm like looking at it and looking pending on like score sheet to score sheet, different places. But there's just different things that I feel like that you need and want out of stuff. But the main thing for me is like, I want it to have musicality and make sense with whatever the song is, or like, you know, if we're conveying a dramatic song, I'd like to see something visually that's dramatic, and then therefore it is also clean and picturesque, and like it makes sense, and everyone's moving their bodies in unison, like, or not in layers, but
Well, there's
it's
definitely an equivalent. There's definitely an equivalent to that on the vocal side too, though, because it's like you could be singing everything rhythmically correct, but stylistically wrong.
Yeah.
You know, and it could be out of tune, but it could also be stylistically correct. I mean, it goes both ways. So
Yeah.
maybe asking it a different way, like if I've never cleaned choreography at a rehearsal before, let's say I'm a totally new teacher and you tell me I have to go clean choreography for an hour, like what do I do? Like, what do I look for? Where do I start?
number one tip: go slow.
Yes.
Like, pick small sections. Don't try to conquer the world all at once. That's the biggest mistake for, like, when you talk about like a dance captain, for a student who's a dance captain and trying to take over like that role and be a leader, and you're like, okay, you guys, can you work on that for a second? And you hear out of the back of your ear, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you're like,
What's that?
you're just running it. Like, what do you gotta pick what you're gonna work on, and then slow that down, and don't be afraid to stop. Like, don't be afraid to stop, fix it, and then we just keep building like Legos on top of that, of like, we start with this 8 count. Now let's do 2 8 counts. Now let's do 3 8 counts, and keep tying it back to that one and keep adding. But yeah, if you're a new director and somebody tells you to go clean, pick a section A. B, again, just depending on like what it is, I always start with out arms for a lot of, like, at least style again dictates that. But for what we do, for instance, at Troy, is we're starting from the core, the ground, and the arms and stuff for a lot of our, at least, stuff is decorative. It's like those can come after. And also that every single kid, this is a no talent, like, we all can make angles, and that's the fastest thing that you can clean in the world is arms, because there's a mirror, all we got to do is go like this and match it. The body and the lower half, that's way more complex and hard to do. So that's why we start with that, so that once that's there, this is like the easiest thing in the world that we can clean up after that. But those are my 2 big things: is pick sections to conquer and go slow.
And to kind of piggyback off what you said, like, a tool that I've used is cleaning, you know, arms first, bottom. So doing the feet with no arms, making sure the feet are right, and then putting it back with arms. Okay, let's make sure the arms are right.
Yep.
So that because it's like they're like doing this.
Yes.
So making sure you get one, and then let's get the other, and then you put it together. Don't try, again, I like that you said, don't try and conquer the world. Like, you should be looking at your show in like small, and this is your show, and you should look at it like this. And like when I clean, I always will be like, all right, like, we're gonna stop on 5, and we're gonna make a picture on 5. So everyone freezes on 5.
Mm-hmm.
Making sure, you know, like, it's super intricate. It's not their favorite thing in the world. Like, I'm sure a lot of students don't really enjoy it, but it's 100% necessary. Every single group cleans choreography, whether it's the dance captain or the director or the choreographers. But I really liked what you said, like, clean, like, do the top half first, then the bottom half, put it together. You know, that's such a good way to break it down, so you don't feel overwhelmed into what's happening.
Yeah. And you want them to feel connected, like, through it. Why does that go with that? How do you make that look like what you do, Bobby? Like, when you dance it, why does it look smooth? Well, again, I want to show you like how I came up or how I learned it. You know, sometimes I'm learning also from another choreographer, and that's still the way that I like to learn it, is because I want to start from the core and connect everything, versus starting, you know, and starting to get all disconnected. I want the core, the arms, the feet, everything broken down to come together, adding it on. And then I also want to throw the vocals back onto it again. even if it's a small section, because what you think a lot of the times is that like we've got to clean this whole song, but what you don't realize is picking those small sections, you are cleaning the whole song. You just aren't there yet as far as like on paper, but there's so many things within one section, as you know, from Garrett teaching, like maybe you go in and teach vocals or you teach band or whatever it is, it's all the same because you're just giving some tools and some techniques through a smaller section that's more you can handle that as a student or a young kid, and then you can get later in the song and you're a student and you're in your head going like, oh yeah, he said something about this, like we need to like get into the ground on something like that, or this section has that sharpness again, or we're in a repeat chorus. So it's like you don't have to get through the full song even in a day. I've had literally rehearsals with a prep group where we worked on maybe 6 bars of music, and it wasn't hard, but it's just like, if that's what they need, that's what they need, and they can apply that later to whatever else. But it does no good to rush through it just to like, or the person who's like, just follow me and look like me, and it's like, well, they can't.
And also I think I think that sometimes what I see is that when like something is not being done right, like some people will just keep running, and this is vocally as well. Like if you are not singing, but if you're not dancing it right, like stop letting them do that. Stop and fix it. Fix that section. Don't, because the more they do it, the more it's going to get into their muscle memory. So if you're like, oh, this part doesn't really look that great, stop what you're doing and clean that section and then put it back together with the vocals, and don't just don't be like, oh well, maybe next time. No, just fix it now. Like it's easier to do it now than you're already here, you're already working on this song, then the next rehearsal you might work on a different song. So don't let them like do it not great, especially if you've like cleaned a section and you run it again and it's bad. Nope, you go back and you clean it, because it's very tedious sometimes, but it's again really necessary.
Do you have any favorite like games or activities that are still helpful for cleaning, but just like when people get really bored, just to kind of like lighten the mood or like have some fun with it? Because like a 3-hour cleaning rehearsal is like my worst nightmare. Like are there any obviously you can't avoid like the difficult work, but are there like some tricks that you've picked up that might be fun for people to try?
I'll do like Spotify, you can go on and do BPM, beats per minute, and just find anything that's similar. So like whatever song you're doing, you could just go figure out that what that song's BPM is, and then just go to Spotify and you can literally just type songs with 135 BPM and it'll pull up a list. Sometimes I'll do that if they're like getting old with a section, or if I really want to work on this chorus forever because it's hard and I want to get it down, and we might start with like the original song, but then it's like I might just do that just to mix it up again, because sometimes kids get re-energized by it because they're like, I've been singing the same song for like 3 months now, and like we clean it and I sing it and it's just so boring, and then you put on a different song, same exact feel, but the kids, it's like maybe it's a current song or something. That's usually what I'll look for too, is like something the kids like, and it's like they're like, oh yeah, now I'm like, and it's like, okay, well, bring that
All
to
of a
the
sudden they have style.
yeah, exactly.
I like to when I clean, I don't know if this is fun, but I will like pick like a section and do it really slow, like 1, 2, 3, and then we do it again and it gets faster and faster and faster and faster until they're doing it over tempo. So then they're just like, it's getting into their body, but they're also like working their brain on like different tempos. I don't know if that's like really a game that's like fun, but normally when I do it, they'll like start laughing when we get like really, really fast, and it kind of like, it's just like, like it's not that serious. It is just show choir. I also picked this up from doing camp with Tori, is like, just you see kids getting frustrated and you're like, all right, 10 high fives, go find 10 people to high five, or, go find 3 people to give a compliment to. Like those aren't necessarily like choreo games, but it does kind of lighten the tension, and also encouraging those leaders that when you see your group maybe get down or whatever, I love when students are like, all right guys, like we got this, like someone to step up. And that really gets the kids going, is when their peers are like, I see you struggling and like I'm here for you, and like we're a team. So encouraging your leaders, there's always that kid in the group that's like got an over the top funny personality that really takes on that role. So allowing them to do that, to not, it doesn't need to be like, this is so serious and if you do not get it, we are not gonna, it can be fun. And also as a choreographer or a director, making sure that you don't get frustrated. I've had moments where I've gotten frustrated because like I've been asking for something and it's not coming, and so I finally just be like, everyone take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out. I'm like, we're just gonna do it right. Just do it right. And I promise you, every single time they do it right. Like they've been doing it wrong, and I'm like, just do it right. Just please do it right. And they do. Like sometimes just taking that pressure off. We're all guilty of this, of being really intense in rehearsal, and at times that is what like that intensity calls for. But at the end of the day, they are just kids, and like it's okay to like have fun or laugh at yourself or like make a stupid joke or whatever. Those are like more my brain breaks. I really like I did not know that about Spotify. That's really fun. I'm
Yeah.
gonna steal that because I
Um,
love that.
this isn't a game, but this is going to, speaking in like, somebody who's looking to like clean their group or get them a little bit cleaner. Sorry, but I just like randomly thought of this too. Sometimes if I see a kid who has the style down really, really well, and I can find a unison section, I will build a triangle basically off of it in a mirror if we have mirrors that we're working with. And I'll start with that kid who has the style, and it'll be a small section. I'll have them dance it. I'll tell the students and keep them informed, like, this is what this needs to be. They have the style down. It's like, that's what I want. I'll add in the next 2 or 3, and it keeps going in that triangle. So they're looking at it kind of in a close knit way and starting to learn how to, just like we have to blend when we sing, they're learning kind of a little bit about like, oh, I need to pay attention to other people, because sometimes you're just in those spread spots and you're not really looking at much besides a level. But it's good sometimes to take a unison little small fun part of the song and just start building off of that, so everybody can kind of see like, oh, like I need to gravitate more towards what that is. It's harder for some kids, but for some kids it also does click just the same, in the same way almost as like people singing spread out, and you move them close together and tell them, you need to listen, really listen when you sing it this time. And it's like, really look when you dance this time, and they're close together. I don't
Yeah.
know.
And I also think when you said calling out, someone that's doing it really well, I am like positive reinforcement. Like it is helpful as a choreographer. And I know kids get so freaked out when you're like, I never like yell, but I'll be like, hey, like, by the way, you have the wrong leg in front. Like that's me telling you that, you're consistently doing it wrong. There's a way to go about that. But also I love when like you say like, okay, can we like clap for so and so because they are killing it. Like that really can uplift a room, and hopefully your group is like cheering for that person. But also like kids in their head are being like, okay, what can, like, I'm watching them now, what can I do to do what they're doing? And I think like showing, like, not being afraid to give that positive reinforcement to your students when it's deserved is important, to keep that kind of uplifted too, so that the kid that was doing your style really well being like, this, he's killing it, like, let's go, so
Mm. Yeah, they want it, like they need the reward for those boring cleaning sessions, and that's like one way to do it, is to say like, my gosh, like look how far you've come. And
yeah.
they always get a good laugh at it. At least like a lot of our boys, it's like so funny when they're a freshman to a senior, and then when they're a senior, they'll be like, y'all, when he was a freshman, he didn't know right or left, and look at him now, and
Like in
everybody
the
just kind of
front row.
laughs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And you will see that throughout every group. That's one of my favorite things about show choir, is the growth from their first year to their last year, or even at the beginning of the season to the end of the season. And I had this one student that really struggled visually for like 3 years, and then his senior year he was like so amazing. And I just kept he was like, I have never been in the front row, and I was like, you are living, like, you just work so hard. And so that's one of my favorite parts about show choir. Not that being in the front row, everyone is visible on those risers, but I think to the kids it kind of means something, like I've been put here because the choreographer sees me as a leader. So
That's another fun way if you have kids too who are not quite like breaking through yet, but they're just kind of staying stagnant a lot. Take a fall show or something, or even if it's not a performance, just block some of those kids up in the front
push
and
them.
for things that don't matter. And you'll see for some of them, it like flips a switch and they're like, I have to be good. I'm in the front. And
Right.
so they'll work way harder. And that's just another way to like get something out of them, even if it's, they're not going to live in the front row or they're not going to perform in the front row maybe by the time it gets there. But it's, again, a way to just get people out of the comfort zone of like, I'm on the third riser in the corner. Like, if I just blend in, nobody's even going to know I'm a singer. I'm not a dancer. And it's like, hey, Thomas, can you come down? You're going to be front center. And they'll always be like,
They're
oh
like,
my God. Oh my God.
me. I think that really pushes students to
Yeah.
it, and like giving them the confidence that you know that they can do it helps them too. Like they're gonna be like, why am I here? Because I think you can do it and I want to push you.
All right, so what
Sorry,
about
we just like ramble off your topic every time.
but that was really great, and it touched on a lot of other things I was going to ask too. So I mean, it's good
You're
stuff.
like, so how do you clean? And we're like, so my favorite color is blue. And that's basically that.
Welcome to the mind of a choreographer. There's just a lot happening all the time.
Lord.
That's why you guys make the big bucks, because you've got the genius.
Well,
What about getting them to sing and dance at the same time though? Because that's always a common complaint, is like when you isolate the dancing, it's fine. When you isolate the singing, it's fine. Then you put it together and it's a mess.
I think just from my experience of when I was in show choir, sorry, my cat is just like crawling on my lap, just wants to be part of it. With my director, we used to like dance and get the dance really good and then sing and then put it together. And he would never really let us off the hook, like until the dancing section sounded like, till the singing sounded what, you know what I mean, like without moving. Like when you put it with choreo, there can be like some more flaws and they're not used to it. And he would really focus on putting these two pieces together. So you dance it first, then you don't dance and you sing. Okay, now we know where it needs to be, and then you put it together until you get to here. He was always he is always really good about that and making sure like the dancing was not as good as it was when we put the vocals with it than when we weren't dancing, and we're gonna figure that out. Like we are not gonna move on until it sounds like this. I think it's, again, tedious work, but I also think it's good for your students to be able to connect that, not just being like, here's the song, let's sing and dance it for the first time ever, good luck. Like they're gonna be like, what are the words? So
yeah. We do a lot of, and this is like, you can do part checking this way too, but we do a lot of one group is dancing while the other one's singing. And you can divide that up even in bass tenors, sopranos, altos, and do it that extensively. But it's also a way for them to be singing and looking through the mirror also at the same time at people doing their choreo. Or you could just divide half your group if you want to do it that way, and just like, half the group sings and half the group dances or whatever. But it kind of just is giving people a look at what they should be doing while they're singing. And then the people who are dancing are also hearing the way that it should be sounding as they're like, whoa, whoa, bum, bum. And they're like hearing some of that stuff maybe they couldn't put together all at once right away when they first did it. But it's just a way to do that. And the real answer is there's no easy way to do that. It's just, again, repetition of like getting it in all those kids' bodies and learning how to do it. Yeah.
I had a new director this year that he was like, it was like maybe November, and they knew their opener, and he was like, they aren't really singing in tune. And I was like, it's okay. Like, it's only November. You know, they just learned the vocals to this. They just learned the choreo. And he's like, he's like looking at his show like this, like none of it's really great. And I'm like, look, section by section, song by song, and it'll come. Like, it may not be great when you first start. There's always improvement as the year goes on. You don't No one's really like killing it. Well, I don't know. It's different in different areas of whatever, but Indiana doesn't really compete until like February, maybe the last weekend of January. And like even then, like, you know, their shows are gonna go on this arc of like getting better. Like, even where you start in January is not where you're gonna end in March. And that's 100% the goal, is to grow as you go.
Yeah. So I'm curious for your guys' thoughts on like once you have everything put together, like you've got the band, you've got the costumes, you got everything, like what can you do with the other elements to enhance the choreography? Like what can the band do? Like what can vocals do maybe to help like bring out a move or accent a move? Like what are some of those kinds of things that you look for? Like once you get into the more like advanced stages of rehearsal and cleaning, like what, and just tying everything together more, if that makes sense.
Look for anything that emotionally watching and listening to it doesn't line up as you like taking your first look at it. I think that that's the power of music, is, and then adding the visuals into it too. It's just like, as a director, I think a lot of them are smart and know what they wanted to convey through the song that they picked, or what, you know, maybe it's just a fun song or whatever that is. Are the kids having fun? If it's just a fun song, does it look fun? Is it playing off of each other with the vocals and the dancing? If you know, then there's your standard things, like if you're going to have this section where you're going to grow the vocal out of it, okay, clump to spread, whatever, like some basic stuff like that. And I don't mean to like put everything inside of a box or anything like that, but for new folks, it's like things like that. If you just want to use that as an example of like, oh, we have a dynamic here. We're going to start soft and we're going to grow, and we're going to grow through this whole phrase, and then we're going to be loud. Okay, what are you doing visually? If everything is like this and you're like being soft and stuff, it's like you're watching that. And I think even somebody who's not really advanced in visuals might be like, this is kind of an odd thing. Like everything's like really big and like in my face, but we're like whispering basically. So it's not as complex, I don't think, as it seems. It's just, again, we're smaller vocally, we're smaller visually. We're bigger vocally, we're bigger visually. And that's a baseline concept. Again, for if anybody watches this that's like very highly advanced in their group's, great. That's amazing. But I'm speaking in terms to somebody who literally is like, what is show choir? I don't know what's happening. That's just a basic concept of something you could look for and be like, I could change that.
Mm-hmm. I agree with what you're saying. I think especially for like beginners, making sure that like if there's like a drum hit or something in your dance break, that your choreo is like, that's an opportunity that is visually effective, as well as like what the band's doing and connecting that. And you know, or like, oh, everyone's hitting a ripple and they're hitting on like 5, 6, 7, and then you could put cymbal clashes when they, you know, on 5, 6, 7. So it kind of adds. I think of that as more like the icing on the cake. That's like kind of the last things you do for my process. But yeah, just and I liked the smaller movement. I totally agree. And then enhancing like your dance breaks with your band, or making sure that, you know, you have like a drum fill where you need a drum fill that may not always be written in the music or whatever, and just kind of making sure that the details are put together. But yeah, making sure that you're not just like step touching on a dance break. Like you should be like actually really trying to go for it and like kill it, like draw the eye. So
Yeah, and word emphasis, that's another big one, like, or the way that you're doing some of your phrasing, like, just these are things that you can look at as a director and look at visuals of stuff that you, so maybe you had a kid who's a student because you can't afford a choreographer your first year or something, and you've got a kid doing it. Well, some things that you're smart enough to look at and see are do the things go together, because as a base level group, I think that's what you want to be focused on, is like, do these go and mesh together, or are we battling each other like the whole time? So I mean, if you're doing Alan Stone, the "It Ain't Bringing Me Down," you're not going to want to be like, "It ain't bringing me down," because you have this like emphasis on the "it ain't bringing me down." So you're going to want to have something down, like visually, that's also like going with that vocal. Those are like the most baseline. I'm just trying to kind of like spin my head here and think of from a director's brain into it, because it's almost like some of these questions too, a director probably honestly answers better than even I can, because more so on the visual. But if I am looking at it as a director, that's definitely easy things that you can look at if your kid is choreographing it or something, and say, "Hey Jimmy, have you thought of like that doesn't really make sense, we're like doing 1 and 2 and 3, but we really probably want to like extend an arm because the phrasing or the way that we're doing the word emphasis on this." Or
Well,
it
I
can
mean,
always be vice versa, and it could be that we need to change something about the vocal. Maybe that's the easier fix for the visual, but they need to, that first couple of years at least, like, and usually always kind of mesh together and go hand in hand.
well, and I think you're always kind of tweaking things as you go, right?
Mhm.
And something I always, or not always, but something I like to explain when I'm doing a clinic is like, okay, when I'm an arranger, I write the music. Like I'm not there when they're choreographing. They're, like we're not doing it at the same time. And so once I see what the visuals are, that might change how I want to do certain things vocally and vice
Mhm.
versa, And so like I feel like some people are uncomfortable with the idea of change, but just small changes and messing with things and trying out new moves and making things fit together more. I think that's the ultimate goal. And I think there's a lot of that happening, maybe more so than people realize, but like a lot of the rehearsal process is like, oh, well, let's change this so it matches better.
Yeah. And that's fun. That's part of the process. And that's what's fun about art and music. It's like you can make the smallest little changes, and like that collaborative effort of like, how do we make this the best possible thing? Well, it might involve like taking some of that choreographer's choreo away. It might involve that choreographer telling the vocal director, like, I really need like a stop and sing moment here. And then that director has to call Garrett Breeze to be like, I really could use a stop and sing. And you're like, I never even like saw the choreo. So yeah, I can add that. But
Yeah.
just that collaborative, just know as a director, there is definitely a collaboration of like a lot of different smart people who are willing to help. And like, at the end of the day, we're all working towards those kids that you have, and we just want to make them be successful at whatever they're doing. So don't be afraid. Yeah, don't be afraid to make changes.
Any sort of final words of wisdom before we wrap it up? Anything on your list? Personal favorite soapboxes, that sort of thing.
I would say don't be afraid to ask for help. My favorite thing about the show choir community is that I just feel like, yes, there's competitiveness. Yes, of course, like you want to have a great program, but I've also never met someone that hasn't been willing to help me, help one of my groups, answer a question. It is like, to me, at the end of the day, it's all about the students and them and what they're doing. And so if you want to bring someone in like to clinic, your group, like, the, that's a really great thing. And don't be afraid to ask for help, to ask for opinion, or, you might pay for some of those services, but that's okay because, I mean, this is a business. But I also like, if I have like a friend who's like, hey, can you just watch this video run of my show and give me your thoughts? Like, yeah, like there's a lot of support in this community, and I really appreciate that. And I definitely think for a newer group starting out that you might, have director friends or know people, like ask. And most people are really going to be willing to help you. Um, and I definitely think just making sure that I always say directors, because all of us work with very different, everyone, different groups and lots of people. I always say directors are reflections, their groups are reflections of their directors. And so when you have a director that's, not super confident or like second guessing themselves, like that's exactly what your students are going to do. And your first year, you're probably going to make a lot of mistakes. I did as a choreographer. I still make mistakes. Like, it's okay. It's always a learning process. The wheel is always spinning, it's always changing. But knowing that, you're being a good leader for your kids, because if you're not super sure of yourself, how could they be? And that comes with, just practice and just having confidence and believing in what you're doing and really like going for it. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. It's okay to ask for a second opinion, but know that, all of the directors, your music educators, and all very qualified. Show choir can be a scary beast, but there's also like lots of resources, lots of people willing to help. So just that, you're in the position for a reason, and that the whole point of show choir is to not win competitions. I always tell my groups, I don't care what place you get, as long as you feel good about what you're doing, you're confident about what you're doing, you go out and you put a great show on. If you get first, great. If you don't, did you have a great show? Then like you're winning, because the only people you can compete with is yourself, and just making sure that that's the point, not to be the best group wherever. It's to educate these students in music, dance, band, all that. So don't be afraid to ask. Like, there's so many great people in this industry who are kind and willing to help and have great input. And hearing all those different opinions, I love hearing judges tapes and having people watch my shows, so I can just be a sponge all the time. So that would be my advice as a new director. So
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say if I were in their position, I would do what I did as a choreographer, which is put myself in as many situations as possible with people who are better than me, or who I, you know, saw as like an idol, or like somebody, a role model that like, oh, they're doing things right, like they're very successful or whatever in my mind. And I would hop into as many as I could for free. When I first started doing choreo, I was hopping into whatever choreographer maybe was coming in town, or I was talking to someone through a connection to be like, hey, I saw, like, I heard you're going to be there. Is there any way I'll dance like the boy part for you or whatever? Or I can just stand there, or I'm just sitting there. I mean, I've had times before where a director comes in to work with a group, and because I look up to them and I think they're really smart, I go in there to that rehearsal and just listen, and like, you know, not obnoxiously like take notes or anything, but listen to people who are doing it the right way, and go experience some of it. Sit in some rehearsals, see if you can go on a show choir, like a competition day with that person, and kind of like shadow them or whatever. But you have to have, you know, that like sense of like, you can't have the ego. You just have to just go do it for the experience of like, you're going to find out there's people that are doing things that are incredible and would work great for your kids, or things to take away from it. And you're going to see things that you'd be like, there's no way I could do that with my kids. But, you know, I think it gets you more comfortable with your kids by seeing other people doing it, and not just kind of going in with no experiences for show choir at all, and just trying, you know, a lot of people make the mistake of like, I have too much pride and like things are my way or the highway. And even though you've never done it before, I mean, what other profession that's crazy? Like, you wouldn't be a doctor and go in and just be like, I've never done this before, but you know what? My way, like, here we go. So just go and experience some of that stuff and see and ask questions from people. They're like, she said, most people are very willing to share and like give you some knowledge or experiences that they've done wrong or done right, and take all that to your classroom.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. This was really fun.
Yes.
So